What is up, guys? In today's video, I'm going to be going over some tips for late game in Fortnite Zero Build. As always, if you guys do enjoy this video, remember to give it a like, subscribe if you'd like to see more, and comment down below what you struggle with most in Endgame. And the first thing I want to get into is something that I've talked about in a bunch of other videos, and that is just going to be that you don't want to play passive all the time. I think what a lot of players struggle with is they get on the game and it's a BR, especially when they're newer to the game, and all they want to do is win because that's the main goal of the game, and that ends up with a lot of players playing super passive, just hoping to make it end game and then catch the final player off guard and get the win that way, or third party the last fight. And this kind of impacts their entire play style for their entire, career in Fortnite, for lack of a better word, where they just don't ever get out of this mindset and they play very passive and they don't get very much experience fighting. And the reason why this matters a lot, in my opinion, is that a lot of people are going to be nervous in game, especially newer players. It's just very natural. If you guys, you probably relate to that. Maybe you don't get nervous anymore, but either way, a lot of players get nervous in game, and a lot of players who don't have much experience fighting get nervous fighting. And so when you're already not comfortable fighting and scared to fight, and then also you have that adrenaline rush of being in endgame, it's just not going to be a good recipe. So I think one of the most important things you can do if you want to win consistently in this game is just to get comfortable fighting. And once you get over that hurdle, then you can worry about winning more. But if you're not comfortable fighting, then I feel like there isn't that much of a point in making it in game. Sure, you can get some wins every now and then, but a lot of it is going to be, I would say, luck and just kind of like circumstance than, your skill in game. So I think getting good fighting or getting comfortable fighting is like the first step. One of the biggest things you can do to give yourself an advantage in endgame this season is just going to be to capture the radio towers. These spawn in second zone about I think 30 seconds in, and they are huge. So when you get a forecast tower, you get to see the next zone for the remainder of the game. So you'll always see where the next zone is going to be. And obviously this is huge for endgame because you'll know where you want to go or where you want to position and where next zone is going to be. And not only will this let you know what a good place to be is, but also it'll let you know what bad spots to avoid. And that sounds really obvious, but I feel like people mostly only think about the positive, but not as much like the negative, because there's some zones where you might just not want to be in a set area, or you might have to kind of make a 50-50 guess. And that 50-50 guess will have huge impact on the game. I'm going to have an example from a recent spectating video I made. And this shows a zone where part of the zone is at Naughty Nets, and then part of the zone is kind of on the mainland of the island. And a lot of the zone is water. And this kind of sets up a situation where players are either going to play this island and hope zone pulls that way, or they're going to play the mainland and hope zone pulls towards the mainland. And whichever happens, if you did the opposite, you're going to be in a terrible situation. Like if you go island and zone pulls mainland, it's going to be rough for you to win that game. And then vice versa. If you played mainland and zone pulls island, it's going to be a difficult game to win. When you have a forecast tower, you just don't even need to make that gamble. You don't have to 50-50 it because you know where the next zone is going to be. You know, in this situation, that it pulls towards mainland, and then the people who played island end up just getting cleaned up and lose the game. So if a player in this situation had forecast tower and they knew where that next zone was going to be, it's going to be much easier for them to win the game than if they didn't have forecast and they have to make that guess. So I would highly recommend getting the forecast tower. I think it is huge. If I could give one tip to everyone for this season, it would just be to go for the forecast tower. It just makes everything so much easier, and you have a huge advantage on the other players because there's only 3 forecast towers per match. So not only do you get this advantage if you get the tower, you deny somebody else having it, and there's only 2 other towers. Sometimes you might be able to pick up a second tower. It's really unlikely that will happen, though. I've had it happen a few times this season where people just don't get them. But more often than not, just getting one, you get yourself that advantage, and then there's going to be only 2 other players or 2 other parties if you're playing a team game mode that get that forecast tower advantage, and those people may or may not make it in game. It's highly probable that you're the only player in the end game that has the forecast tower benefit because, people can lose the match, and it's not like something you can loot off somebody's body. So I just, like I said, I think getting the forecast tower is huge. I think some people want to avoid it because typically you're going to have to fight for these towers. But again, if you get comfortable fighting, it's not going to be that big of a deal. And if you get comfortable playing out the timings around the forecast towers, I don't think it's that big of a deal at all. Typically, when you do make it to endgame, you're going to want to play the edges of zone because at that point, you don't have to worry about the side near storm. So it's like if your back is to storm, you don't have to worry about that for the most part. There will be times where, people might be like late rotating in storm or whatever. But if that side of zone has been in storm for a while, more often than not, there's not going to be anybody coming there from. You don't have to worry about that as much. And then you only have to worry about the angles in front of you, right? But if you go center zone, then you have to worry about all of like 360 degrees around you. And this, especially when snipers are in the game, makes the game a lot more kind of like RNG. So that's why most players like to play edge of zone. Like I said, they can come from storm, but it doesn't always happen. There will be zones where like playing center is more ideal, but that would be if there was like a good power position center and then the rest of the zone was like not good. So like this spot on the map here, this is like a building in between Brutal Bastion and then like the other biomes. And if the zone was just around this building, then like the player who controls this building has a huge advantage, but it's also one of those things where like everywhere else on the zone sucks. So like those people are going to want to take you out if you are center here. So if you do end up in a zone where you have to play center for whatever reason, just keep in mind that like everybody else is probably going to be focusing you. Most people go edge and then look inward. And that's another reason why being center isn't as ideal, because a lot of people do play edge. So they naturally focus center, but there will be games where you want to play center. If you do have to do that, like I said, just kind of keep that in the back of your mind. Know that you're going to get third-partied. Don't overexpose too much looking for kills. You can still shoot at people and try to get kills, but just don't dedicate too much into it because you're probably going to get third-partied. When moving zones start to happen, though, if you are able to get into the new safe area first and then hold the rest of the lobby, that is going to be ideal. And this is another reason why the forecast towers are so helpful, because you can see where moving zone is going to be before it like goes there, and then you can kind of position yourself on that edge of zone if possible, or at the very least be ready to get there first and make your life easier. One thing I think a lot of players struggle with when it comes to endgame, especially like newer players or players that have never played competitive, is that you want to keep in mind which zone you can end the game in. If you're going into first moving and there's still 20 people up, that's excessive for Zero Build. But just, as an example, if you're going into first moving and there's 20 people up, you're probably just going to want to rotate into moving zone and then get deeper into that safe area and play a bit safe, because you're not going to win the game in that zone anyways, But if you're going into first moving and there's only like 2 people left, then you can kind of do what I said before, where you get to the new safe area first and then turn and hold the rest of the lobby. If the lobby is really populated, then you probably just want to play your life and play for the next rotation and just consistently do that over the course of the game. But once the game is a little more died down, then you can play to end the game. And like I said, this just comes down to how many people are left alive. Really populated lobbies, play for deeper rotations, play to like stay safe and just consistently put yourself in the best spot. And then once it dies down a little bit, that's when you play to end the game. Once I like I talked about at the start of the video, a lot of people are scared and stressed end game, so they just kind of do random stuff, and it doesn't always work, because the end game is so much kind of like situational decision making, depending on like the zone, the factors of the game, like how many people are left alive, whether or not they're fighting. There's so much situational stuff going on that's different from game to game that it's hard to give blanket advice. And that's why I think at the very least you want to just be comfortable fighting, because at that point at least you're not nervous about fighting, because you're probably going to be nervous in game if you aren't as used to like playing in game and you haven't played the game as much. And like I talked about before, when you have a game that's more populated, you just kind of want to play to consistently put yourself in a decent location to the point where once the game is endable, then you can end it. But that doesn't mean you don't want to ever fight. Like there will be times where you have to fight, or like you can still like get shots on people or third-party fights. But what I mean is you just don't want to like overcommit to something like playing the edge of new zone and trying to hold the rest of the lobby, because if the lobby is really populated, they're going to push past you. But if they're not as populated, you can end the game. So don't think that you can never fight until there's only 2 people left, but just keep in mind like how many people are left alive and how likely you are to get third partied, because when the zone is really small, that's when you kind of just end up getting chain third partied. As far as the broad strokes go, that's it though. I think just get a forecast tower, play edge of zone, probably most likely. If there's any power positions in zone, that can be good, but those are going to get you focused at times, so you kind of have to like weigh the risk and the reward there. More often than not, it's going to be worth it. Again, just keep back in the mind that you're going to get third partied. When it comes to moving zones, get there first and hold the lobby if you can. If it's a more populated game, then you just want to play for future moving zones to the point where once the lobby is a little more dead, that's when you can kind of get ahead, hold the rest of the lobby, easy win there. Some other things I wanted to talk about are going to be that I like to keep track of players when it comes to endgame and how many unknowns there are. So this is probably easier done in solos, but if there's like 3 opposing players left and I know where 2 are, then odds are the other one is going to be somewhere on the edge of zone. Like if both of them are to my right, and like I haven't seen anything to my left, but there's still another player left alive, then that other player is going to be to the left most likely. And that's why I said this kind of works best in solos, because everybody who is in the game should be, opposing one another. But even then in duos, like if you know where one duo is, you've seen another player somewhere else, probably not a part of that duo, just keeping track of things like that in in-game can be helpful, especially in those in-games that are like super stagnant. And that's kind of a skill that I feel like you get better at over time. Another thing about getting comfortable fighting is that creative is probably going to be the best way to practice this. I'll have a video linked down in the description below of creative maps I recommend, but creative is just like a great low stakes way to practice fighting, because if you're playing BR, you have to load up to the game, jump out of the battle bus, land, loot up, and then fight. Whereas in creative, you just fight. Like there's no downtime at all. It doesn't matter if you lose. It doesn't matter if you die 50 times in a row. It just doesn't matter. Whereas in BR, there's so much more downtime. And that is, again, part of what keeps people kind of at a lower skill ceiling, I feel like, or not like approaching their skill ceiling and playing a bit more passive because of that penalty for losing and because of that downtime. Whereas like if you play in creative, you can get in a lot of fights in a much shorter time span. So it's just more efficient environment to get in fights. I feel like in 10 games or 10 minutes of creative, you might get like hours worth of experience because of how scared some people play in BR. You know what I mean? Another thing that kind of goes back to that point of people being scared and hiding all game is that they don't really get what they need to win the game. And that makes it much harder to win. Like if they don't get shockwaves or mobility items, if they don't get good heals, if they don't get good loot, if you don't have the things that you want to play the game with because you've been hiding all game and you're like scared to take a fight, or scared to check an area for loot because you might run into people, sure, you might make it in game, but your odds are you're just going to lose anyways if you don't have what you need to win the game, So I think it is worth taking risks earlier on in the game to get the items that you actually need to win the game. Like if you have slurps end game and no one else does, or you have shockwaves and mobility and no one else does, or in an alternate reality, a game where you have shockwaves versus a game where you don't have them, it's probably going to be easier to win the game when you have shockwaves, right? And then the same goes with slurps. So, get comfortable fighting, play the game out in such a way where you get what you need to win the game, and then, make it in game and win the game. This is really easy done with like things like the combat caches in the game, the hollow chests, NPCs that sell shockwaves, the on the go bag augment. There's a lot of like kind of guaranteed ways to get loot right now. Not really guaranteed, but like if you don't have a good shotgun, you can go check the hollow chest. You can go for your combat cache. If you don't have shockwaves and cabbies in zone, then you can do that. There's a lot of things this season it's still kind of RNG, but there's a way for you to make it happen, and that's pretty nice. One final thing I want to talk about is that typically the better players in the lobby tend to play aggressive and go for kills. And in Chapter 4, this usually means they go for the radio towers and they go for the island. Since island was added, I feel like a majority of the games I win, the best players I fought were on island. And this kind of is counterintuitive to a lot of players because they think the best players are going to make it in game. But like, let's say there's 10 players in the lobby, and if you ranked them by skill, the first, second, and third best player all fight for island, probably only one of those players is going to come out alive, and the person who does is going to have a much easier time winning the game than if they didn't take those fights and then kind of let that person exist in the lobby. Because once you do get down to endgame, things can get like pretty hectic and pretty random at times because of how small the zones are. Like if you fight somebody, you're probably going to get third partied if you don't end that fight quick, So I prefer not only to, get the forecast towers for myself, but I also tend to fight the better players in the area around me that way. And that fight is a little more scripted in a way. Like, you're going for the tower, they're going for the tower, but I would kind of encounter them in that type of situation. I would rather that than just randomly, maybe they shoot me in the back at a random time where like we're not really going for an objective. If you keep your kind of eyes peeled or whatever, like if you're ready to fight when you're going for those objectives, I think it just makes the rest of the game so much easier. I do have a video in my channel, it'll be linked down in the description below, about how I like to play island fights and what I do to like consistently win them. But just in general, I do get comments from time to time from players that are like, your end games are so dead. My solos have like 20 people moving. And I think really that just comes down to playing aggressive. If you're playing aggressive and getting kills throughout the course of the game, your end game isn't going to be as populated, you know? Whereas like if you're playing the hide all game, you're not getting that experience fighting, probably not getting the loot you need and the items you need to win the game. Then also there's going to be more people left alive end game in a smaller zone, and that's going to make the game more random. And odds are you didn't fight the better players that were going for those mid-match objectives, so they're probably going to be left alive in the game as well. So there's like so many reasons why I think fighting and like kind of getting kills over the course of the game is valuable. It just makes the rest of the game easier, I think. It's very rare that the best player I fought in a game is the player who gets second. Like, it happens sometimes, but it's pretty rare. More often than not, I fight them earlier in the game. And that happens a lot in Chapter 4 because of those mid-match objectives, and it also makes it easier to look for kills. Back in the day, if you wanted to get a high kill game, you were like, all right, I'm going to land here, and then I'm going to rotate to this area because that's where I think the other like high population POIs are going to rotate to. This season, it's super easy. You land where you want to land, rotate to the radio tower. You're probably going to fight some people there. Maybe go for your combat cache. You're probably going to fight some people there. And then when island comes, go for island and you're going to fight some people there. Then also once you have control of island, you can, shoot down on people. The scripted nature of this game makes it very easy to kind of get those like more higher kill games. And I do have an entire series on my channel called the Inside the Mind series where I walk you through my thoughts and decisions during a match. And I think that's something that can help a lot in some of these end game situations, not only for seeing how I play out the end game, but also what I do over the course of the game to get what I need for the game, like to win, and then also to get those other players out of the lobby. But that is gonna be it for this video. As always, remember to give it a like if you enjoyed it, subscribe if you'd like to see more, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Thanks for watching.